The Mac Pro is dead. On the 26th of March this year, Apple removed it from their website with no press release, no farewell, and no acknowledgement of what it meant. Apple confirmed it has no plans to offer future Mac Pro hardware. Not a pause, not a rethink, just gone. And I keep thinking about the same question. Did it have to end this way? I think there were moments, real concrete moments, where Apple could have made a different decision, and the Mac Pro might still be here. This is the story of those moments, and what they say about one of the most complicated customer relationships Apple never quite got right. This video is sponsored by Zero Duplicates. More on them later. To understand how the Mac Pro died, we have to go back to where it started. The Mac Pro arrived roughly 20 years ago as an Intel-based replacement for the PowerPC-driven Power Mac G5. And it was a proper workstation. It had expansion slots, upgradable RAM, multiple hard drive bays. It was the kind of machine that sat in editing suites and recording studios and just worked year after year because you could keep upgrading it. It was dependable, and for a certain kind of professional, dependable is everything. Then, in 2013, Apple decided to reimagine the Mac Pro. Apple gave up PCIe expansion and decided Johnny Ive knew best with a smaller cylindrical design, and it looked like the future, like something no other company would have tried. The problem was that the future it promised didn't work. See, the compact design forced a thermal architecture that just couldn't scale, because professionals who needed to push the machine hard found it throttling under sustained load, as the CPU and dual GPUs shared one triangle-shaped heatsink with a single fan. Then, to allow system expansion, Apple wanted you to buy into their Thunderbolt-based dongle idea, which was supposed to replace internal PCIe slots. But Apple never really delivered that ecosystem it had implied was coming. Now, Apple acknowledged its mistake in 2017, when Phil Schiller sat down with journalists and said, essentially, hands up, we've painted ourselves into a corner. It was a rare moment of public honesty from Apple, and it actually rebuilt some goodwill, because what they were saying was, we heard you, and a proper machine is coming. But it took 2 years to release the third generation Mac Pro. In 2019, they delivered on that promise. The new Mac Pro launched to near universal praise from the professional community. An aluminium tower chassis, PCIe expansion, real airflow, even an optional afterburner card for accelerating video decode. It did cost a small fortune, starting at a small $5,000, but it was everything the 2013 model was not. It felt like Apple was taking the Pro market seriously again, even if they sold optional $700 wheels. Then, 6 months later, Apple announced the transition to Apple Silicon. 6 months. The best Intel Mac Apple had ever made was already a deprecated platform before people had even finished paying it off. And you might argue that that's just the nature of a major architecture transition, that it was unavoidable. And to some context, that's probably true. But context matters here. This wasn't the first time Apple had changed direction on its Pro users. It was the third. And for studios and production houses that had rebuilt their workflows around the 2019 Mac Pro, that was where their patience ended. When Apple Silicon arrived, it changed what a Mac could do. The performance per watt gains were real, and they were remarkable. And the M series chips are among the most impressive pieces of engineering Apple has produced in years. That part of the story isn't in dispute. But the Mac Pro never really found its footing in that new ARM-based world. And the reason comes down to a fundamental tension in how Apple Silicon is designed. You see, the architecture that makes these chips so fast and so efficient is the tightly integrated design where the CPU, GPU, and memory all live on the same piece of silicon. But doing this also makes it incredibly expensive to scale the design upwards. And upwards is exactly where the Mac Pro is supposed to live. There were reports, fairly credible reports, of an Apple Silicon chip above the Ultra, often referred to as the Extreme although that name appears to be speculation rather than anything official, the idea was to give the Mac Pro genuine performance headroom over the Mac Studio, something it desperately needed to justify existing. The project was apparently cancelled because the yield rates on a chip that large were reportedly making the economics untenable. And so the Mac Pro ended up in a position it could never escape. It was last updated in 2023 with the M2 Ultra chip, but then that configuration became outdated when the smaller Mac Studio received the M3 Ultra. So the Mac Pro sat at $6,999, running a chip a full generation behind. It had expansion slots. You couldn't put a third-party GPU in because Apple Silicon's GPU doesn't work that way, and it had a price premium with no performance premium to justify it. And honestly, for nearly $7,000, you'd hope that the Mac Pro at least came with a tool to help clean up your downloads folder. Speaking of which, a quick word from today's sponsor, Zero Duplicates. It's a Mac, iOS and iPadOS app that finds duplicate files by comparing the actual content in them, not just the file names and the metadata. So even if you've renamed those files or have them in different locations, it's going to find them. It's built for exactly the kind of mess I always find myself in, needing to clean up folders, backups, downloads, or external drives where duplicates quietly pile up and take up system storage. Everything runs locally on your machine, and there are safeguards in place that means you always retain at least one copy of a file so you don't accidentally nuke everything. Zero Duplicates is free to download with unlimited scans, and you get 500 megs of free deletion so you can try the app out. I'll leave a link into the video description, and thank you to Zero Duplicate for sponsoring this video. Back to it. So what could Apple have done differently to enable a more powerful solution above the Mac Studio? Well, one idea that's been discussed in tech circles was a dedicated PCIe expansion enclosure, like a separate box connecting to the Mac Studio via a custom high-speed connector that would sit beneath the Mac Studio like a plinth. The idea was the Mac Studio handles the compute, and then the expansion box handles the add-in cards in the enclosure. And it's a neat idea, but I don't think it would have worked. See, the technical challenges are one thing, but the deeper problem is that a new proprietary connector, however clever, would have been yet another variable for the professional market that had learned to be skeptical of Apple's long-term hardware commitments. The last thing that community needed was another special connector to bet on. And the honest answer is that the only thing that could have genuinely saved the Mac Pro was a chip difference to the Mac Studio. That required solving the yield problem on the Extreme chip or finding a different architectural approach entirely, like a multi-die design package, or packaging it in a way that didn't require a single piece of enormous silicon. Neither was simple, neither was guaranteed, and Apple apparently decided neither was worth pursuing. If you like this video, be sure to check out my other Mac-related videos on this channel, like the one breaking down the 10 best Mac apps I wish I'd known sooner.